الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى خصوصا على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه وأزواجه وذرياته أجمعين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون وقال الله تعالى في مقام الآخر يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله ولتنظر نفس ما قدمت لغد واتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كن في الدنيا كأنك غريب أو عابر سبيل وعد نفسك في أهل القبور صدق رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وقال الله تعالى في شأن حبيبه مخبرا وآمرا إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على سيدنا وشفينا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وأصحابه وبارك وسلم وصل عليه. My respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I have often talked about how weak the shaitan is and how little he can actually do and how little power he has over us. However, that is true. He does have lots of tricks under his belt, and that is where his real influence and power comes from. The trickery of the shaitan, the clever way in which he employs his disciples, his mini shaitans, and his ghouls and jinns that he has under his control, and of course human beings as well. He has power over, and the way they come up with fantastic, impactful, and effective tricks to entangle and entice humanity. Iqbal was a great philosopher of Islam, a man who had a great and a deep understanding of Islamic principles, Islamic philosophy of life, and more than that, he was somebody who was extremely concerned about the Muslims, concerned about their backwardness, concerned about their inability to truly understand the message of Allah. He always lamented and always tried to guide the Muslims by telling them how the world is tricking them, how dangerous it is, and how they need to be awake, and how they really need to be alert all the time and fully awake in order to be able to challenge and in order to really resist the temptations of the world. And here is a conversation he had in the palaces of Bhopal. Bhopal is a city in India, and at one time it was governed by the Nawabs who were the Muslims. And he was invited by the Nawab of Bhopal to stay with them and come and give them some advice. It's interesting what the advice was later on, but he said to them, you have very few Muslims in your city, and yet you've been ruling here for 400 years. And the Nawab asked him, what can I do? He said, it's a bit late now, for 400 years, your ancestors have just been busy building these Sheesh Mahal, the glass palaces, crystal palaces, and you've done so little. But anyway, that's another story. But here, he has an encounter with the shaitan in the crystal palace. And Iqbal asks him, what have you told? He's talking to the shaitan and asks him, what have you told? And what orders have you given to your disciples, the corrupt political leaders, and the greedy capitalists and the industrialists? What advice and what orders have you given them? And he says to them this. He says, this is Shaitan speaking. He says, "Ye faqa kash jo maut se darta nahi zara. Ye faqa kash जो मौत से डरता नहीं जरा, और रूहे मोहम्मद इसके बदन से नकाल हो, देकर फरंगी तखय्यलात इस्लाम को हिजाज हो यमन से नकाल हो. This is the advice I have given my crafty industrialists, greedy industrialists, and the corrupt political leaders, and my disciples, whether they are jinn or men, that what they need to know is this: that this peasant, meaning the Muslim, this peasant is never afraid of death. And the solution is this: take the spirit of Muhammad away from him, and then you can get rid of Islamic thoughts and ideology from Hijaz and from Yemen. And what was he saying? He says, Ruhe Muhammad iske badan se nakal. Take out the spirit of Muhammad from his body, take out the love of deen, and make him one who is without the spirit of Muhammad. And when the Muslim is without the spirit of Muhammad, in other words, he no longer prays, he no longer gives his zakat, he no longer does the zikr and the recitation of the Quran. What is left now? How easy it is now to get him, and it is easy now to tempt him into those traps and snares, of yours. It will be very easy, he says to them. And after reading that encounter of Iqbal with the shaitan, I came across another encounter of another man of God with the shaitan. And this time, the shaitan is in a conference where he's the keynote speaker and is making final recommendations to his followers. And he gives them 9 recommendations. I'm not going to be able to cover all of them today. I'll just give you a snapshot of some of the key recommendations that the shaitan makes to his followers, how to distract the Muslims and how to mislead them, how to tempt them. Okay? And he says first to them, look, first tempt them to overspend so they go into debt. Okay? And what is he teaching his corrupt political leaders and the greedy industrialists and capitalists? Well, the best solution is this: tempt them to overspend, so they go into debt. Okay? And once they're in debt, what will they do? They have no choice but to repay that debt. And in order to repay that debt, they will have to work overtime. They will have to work very, very hard. So much so that other things will happen which follow here. He gives the advice there, and encourage them to visit the temples of modern material world, the shopping centres, and buy whatever they don't need, and give them the slogans, things like this, that buy now, pay next year, or something like this, that buy one and get one free, or buy now and pay later. These slogans tempt the weak-hearted, the uncooled, those who do not understand the way of the life and who are not streetwise, are then tempted by these slogans, and then they end up being indebted. And now, how do you pay your debt? Of course, that is not his problem. See, this is not the problem of the shaitan. He's not concerned about the problem. His job is to make problems for us. His job is to tempt us and to put us into those snares where we can't get out of. Okay? He goes on to say, well, another of my recommendations, this is Shaitan's recommendation to his followers, is, well, make them work long hours so that they can maintain their empty lifestyles. So that they can maintain their empty lifestyles. Those false lifestyles of being big and great and important, okay? Of having big cars, of having the designer clothes, of having the eating from the great restaurants, and becoming members of leisure clubs and having this card and that card to show that, yes, we are worthy. We are worthy. Yes, we have value. Yes. Plastic cards and money seem to make us feel that we are valuable. Not our humanity. Okay. So he says, his recommendation is that make them work long hours so that they can maintain their empty lifestyles. And the Quran says, وَفَرِهُ بِالْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَمَا الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا فِي الْآخِرَةِ إِلَّا مَتَاعٌ. He says, they are very happy and joyous about their worldly life. What is this worldly life compared to the hereafter? It is nothing. And then he goes on making the third recommendation. He says, well, discourage them from spending too much time with their families. Okay. This has always been one of the big temptations of the shaitan, and it's mentioned in the hadith, And the shaitan invites all his disciples, and he asks them, what have you done today? And each one of them, tells him, I did this today. I made somebody steal. I made somebody murder. I made somebody do a fraud. I made somebody cheat. I made somebody fight. I did this and I did that, and I created conflict. I did this evil, and he says to all of them, that's okay, fine, you did a good job. And finally, one man comes and he says, you know what I did today? He says to the shaitan, I managed to divide the family. I divided husband and wife. I created a fight and conflict between husband and wife. And he said, well done. This is the best of all. And indeed, shaitan's biggest attempt always is to actually destroy the family, to break the family. Once the family is broken, well, you will then have armies of delinquent young people who have no one to care for them, young people who are lost, who find no role models around them. And then, of course, that is the beginning of a life of prison, a life of offending, a life of crimes, really. And you can see why the shaitan is so happy when one of his disciples breaks up the family. So he says, discourage them from spending too much time with their families. And what happens today? It's well known that today people spend least time in their families. Either they are at work or they are enjoying themselves outside the home with their friends, but not with their families. Is it any wonder that the Prime Minister talks about the broken family? And of course, broken family means a broken society and a broken country and a broken humanity, really. Well, I'll continue with these recommendations of the shaitan. Possibly I'll have them printed out for you next week to look. The 9 recommendations that the shaitan is making. And of course, this is all being implemented by his followers. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam as the guide, as the hadi, as the murshid. And he gives us the ummah, the jama'at, the group, the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'at, in order to protect ourselves from the influence and the impact of these shaitanic thoughts. And the shaitan is working. His followers are continuously working. Look at the billboards. I'll talk about how he says, use the billboards, use the magazine covers, use the newspapers, use the TV screen to entice people. And they are constantly working 24/7 throughout the year, all the time, continuously bombarding us with their trash, with their evil thoughts and ideas. And how can we protect ourselves? This is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us when he said, whenever you have any evil thoughts, say, A'udhu billahi minash shaytanir rajim. Wa'udhu bi kalimatillahi tammati min kulli shar. Seek Allah's protection. Turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But be aware, never forget that the shaitan is after you continuously. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. May He give us the shields that will protect us from the insinuations and the whispers and the ideas and the thoughts and the arrows that are poisoned and that are constantly fighting us. Wa akhiru da'wana